name is Amanda Kokila, and I'm a researcher in human capital at the Conference Board. I will be your moderator and host on today's webcast, Activating Talent, the journey to redefine performance inside and outside of ADP. Today, our speakers will discuss how to reposition performance management for a greater purpose, the importance of focusing on uniqueness to supercharge performance management, reframing calibration for greater value, driving engagement with performance management, and overcoming the challenges that we can expect with this kind of transformation. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to go over a few details about how you can participate with us today. First, engage with us. Type your questions and comments in the chat box, and throughout the webcast, I'll be monitoring comments and we can address questions as we go along. You can download the presentation. That link is at the bottom of your screen, and you can make the screen larger by clicking on those arrows, the top 4 arrows in the right-hand corner of your screen. There is a brief evaluation at the end of today's presentation. It only takes a minute to complete, so please do take a moment to tell us what you think. And this webcast will be made available on demand following today's presentation. You can access it at conferenceboard.org. You can earn HRCI, SHRM, or CPE recertification credits if you participate with us live today. You can request those credits in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Please put in your name, email address, and the type of credit you need in the box on the lower right-hand side. You will need to remain on for the entire webcast, and if you're interested in CPE credits, please respond to those 3 pop-ups throughout the presentation. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Jill Altana is the Chief Talent Officer for ADP. Jill and her team are leading many progressive talent efforts for ADP, including development of talent products like the Leader and Network Compass, adding to ADP's product portfolio. Jill, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
And Jay Caldwell is responsible for leading the design and delivery of talent solutions across the global ADP enterprise. For the past year, Jay has been leading the talent and performance management transformation at ADP, including the deployment of Standout. So Jay, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having us, Amanda.
Great. And Jill, can you start us off and tell us a bit about ADP and what's new?
So thank you, Amanda. So Jay and I are thrilled to have this opportunity to share a little bit about our story and really how we changed our culture and created a world of talent activation. So it's been a really interesting journey for us, and the past 12 months have been amazing, and certainly more amazing than we could have even imagined. So just to give you a little bit of context, I thought it would be helpful to tell you a little bit about ADP. So, so recently, over the past couple of years, as a company, we made a decision to be all in on HCM. And so essentially what that means is we divested all of our businesses that were not in the HCM suite. And so now we provide full end-to-end services to all HCM clients around the world. So that was a very significant business change for us. And a little bit more about ADP. So we're about a $13 billion company. We have over 750,000 clients, 58,000 associates around the world. And we are going through a transformation and have been over the past couple of years, really shifting from a payroll company to an HCM company. And so when you think about a company that's 70 years old, that's been in the business of payroll and compliance for a long time, what are the words that come to mind when you think of that type of culture, besides increasingly and substantially boring? Beyond that, though, when you think about that culture and what's worked for us and what has made us successful, are words like accuracy, compliance, financial and fiduciary responsibility. But what doesn't come to mind is innovation and thought leadership. So we set out on this journey to transform the organization to become really a technology company that offers great service versus a service organization, which is what we are historically known for. Through that transformation, we actually developed a transformation office. And so we have very aggressive goals over the next 3 years, both in terms of growth and workforce optimization. And so to create that environment where people are comfortable with that level of transformation, we really wanted to dig in and focus on our talent. And so that really gave us the platform for having a very innovative talent and performance platform. So before we got into that, and to really set the stage for us, we set out on a journey, and we went on the road and we talked to everyone and anyone about their impression of what it's like to work with our talent and performance systems and processes at ADP. And we got an earful. We heard from a lot of people and from managers, from our associates, that it's a very complicated, disaggregated process that at the end of the day doesn't really provide a lot of benefit from a talent perspective. So we go through hours and hours and hours of talent calibrations and talent conversations. And at the end of the day, we weren't actually making significant talent decisions. And you can see by some of the statistics that we have on the slide that all of the processes and systems that we had in place really did not yield the benefit that we were looking for. As an example, we use the 9-box. And as I said, we spent lots of time sort of calibrating around the talent and what boxes people were in. But at the end of the day, those 9-box ratings changed, 50% of them changed year over year. With our succession plan, only about 15% of the people who were in the succession plan actually landed in the roles that we were planning for them. So while it was a lot of time and effort, what we heard from people is it's too much work and it doesn't yield enough benefit for us. So we set out on a journey that said, we're going through transformation as an organization anyway, let's take advantage of this platform and let's go big and bold with our talent and performance. And Jay is going to talk to you about some of the things that we did in that space.
Okay, thank you, Jill. And I think one of the things Amanda will be trying to cover as well is how some of the pace we've been trying to work with and kind of the themes of the implementation of some of the changes that we've used have tried to carry that kind of idea of transformation and acceleration through as well. So we'll try to emphasize that in addition to kind of the performance side here. One of the things we really started with, though, was on the purpose of performance management. I think, as you get into any big transformation, and this topic has been, in the news for quite a while, we wanted to make sure we were focusing on the things that we felt like mattered most. And like most companies, most of you probably out there, you probably had some changes that had happened recently. So for us, we had actually just gone through a very significant transformation around pay for performance that started and ended, started I would say about 6 years ago and ended just about 3 years later. But it was a very significant change for the organization to bring better consistency around performance management, to better align how we were viewing performance and subsequently compensation decisions, so really linking pay and performance more tightly together. And a big focus on differentiation to making sure we were using our rewards differentially based on how people were performing. All really important changes for the organization. We still believe in all of those things as well. I think the important point here for everyone to understand is if you have a pay for performance environment, it makes kind of progressing even further a little challenging, a little concerning, because when there's links with pay and your performance management process, you have to be careful. So that's something we've always been very mindful of. So important context to set up front is we want to honor the past here. We want to maintain the things that we've already started in recent history as we continue to move forward. So that was one purpose for us, is let's make sure we didn't break all the good things that we've actually put into place in the recent history at ADP. So I'd like to talk a little bit now. Did I go too far? Let's see. Okay. So one of the things that we can bring up the first poll question here. One of the things in terms of a purpose for us as we think a little bit more about performance management and more of what it can offer is how do we extend that purpose even further? So again, I mentioned we were focused a little bit more on kind of consistency, differentiation. I would say a little bit less on something like, is performance management actually helping our team leaders get more from their teams? That ended up being one of our main purposes. So we wanted to ask you here, for you, the audience out there, to what extent does your process actually do that? So we'll give these a second to come in here. And we could close the poll. It looks like the pattern has emerged pretty quickly. So it looks like 60% of you on a moderate extent and another 30% of you some extent. So that's kind of middle of the road there. No surprise. That's actually something we heard from our managers at ADP around, was our current process really helping you get more from your teams? We actually got a little bit lower on that, quite honestly. So no surprise that you out there are experiencing something similar. I think that's a pretty big gap for performance management in organizations, certainly our organization. If we're going to do something like this, we really wanted to make sure that at the end of the day, it helps us drive the business. It helps team leaders actually drive performance in their teams. So we could go back to the slides here, and let me move forward. So one of our most important things that we decided to focus on was our managers' experience. So really focusing on performance management from a user perspective, and our number one user really being our managers. So I'd be interested to see, we can kind of try something out here. The experience that your managers have with performance management, if you could just type in one word in the chat box, I'd love to see, like if you asked your managers what emotion comes to mind when I say performance management, what pops in? So we'll give that a second. Hate, dread, frustrating. Okay, dread. Torture. Cumbersome, frustration. Yeah, pretty similar when we typically ask this question. Most people, when they hear the words performance management, they absolutely disdain it. That's also, again, a big problem. We're spending a lot of time and money on this. So for us, a primary purpose is how do we, for our managers, when they hear the words performance management, how do we change that experience so they actually feel good about it, something that they actually think is useful for them. So they've been the number one group we're designing for, which I think is a big change because previously the number one audience was, 1 and 2, senior executives and HR. Is what we would typically do performance management for, especially as it aligns to compensation and how we make decisions, getting the right data, holding people accountable, those types of things. So really now focusing on our managers has pivoted a lot of the decisions that we've made and kind of design of this performance management approach. So that's one, is a main purpose for us is how do we improve the experience of our managers and act on some of the things Jill shared just a moment ago. Number 2 is really around learning, and that sounds completely obvious because hopefully many of you have development and learning involved in your performance management process. For us, though, really specifically, we want people to learn more about themselves. So through what we focus on with performance management is a lot around strengths. And helping our associates at ADP really understand what their strengths are and then better apply them at work. This is, again, I think a pretty significant shift for us around what we want performance management to do today versus what it's done in the past is how do we help people really understand what's unique about them and bring more of that to work every day. And that resonates really, really differently, and that matters because, the more self-awareness people have, the further they can kind of bring their careers. There's plenty of research to demonstrate that self-awareness and understanding is really a good predictor of people's success in the future. So it certainly has an impact on people's performance. It also has an impact on the experience of the entire effort. So to bring this to light a little bit, we actually have a video. We could bring up a video of our associates as they experience this element of the individualization of performance management. So we can go ahead and play that video if we could.
We're getting back to the basic foundation of focusing in on the individual person and not trying to make everyone a robot.
So yeah, what other things did you guys kind of stand out for you when you took the assessment?
And I love taking that assessment thing because it was yep. Now, okay, so if I can't explain myself to somebody, just read this, please, because this is me.
So for instance, like Tammy Lynn, like she needs time to process things. Like she doesn't want you to come over and just throw something on her plate and it throws her day off.
It was the provider creator.
And it starts better conversations because now I know her and how she thinks. And it's just making sure that because I can be overzealous and things like that, like I'm taking into consideration other people and what they need as well.
It's different than other changes. It's different than a process change. All right, we're no longer doing it this way, we're doing it this way. We're no longer going to say this, we're going to say this. This is like completely different thinking.
Okay, I think we're back here. So it looks like some people may have had some trouble with the audio of the video. Basically, to summarize it, everyone just said Jill and Jay is great. Long story short, that was in there. For those of you that couldn't hear it, one of my favorite quotes shared from one of our associates was, this wasn't a process change for us. This wasn't about just changing a process. This was really about changing our mindset and the way we think at ADP. And I think my favorite, another favorite element of that video is it's emotional. So this element of focusing on strengths and really helping people understand what makes them unique really had an emotional connection for our associates as we deployed this approach here at ADP. So Jill, I don't know if there's anything else you'd add to that.
So if you think about, when I opened, we talked about the level of transformation that's going on in the organization. That can create a tremendous amount of angst for people, right? So if you can really help people focus on what they can control, the strengths that they bring to the table, and how they can contribute to the overall transformation, it's easier to bring them on the journey.
Yeah. Yep. Any reactions from your end, Amanda?
So I love that video, and I hope that most of the audience could hear it because it is great to hear from the people that went through this themselves and focusing on the strengths. I think we got this one question in early on that's talking, Jill, when you were talking about the succession planning, why was it only about half the time? This is early on in the slide deck.
So there were a couple things about the succession planning. The 50% was really related to our 9-box chart. So one of the things, as many of you know, a 9-box really measures performance and potential. And so it's really a long-range picture of the talent that you have. It's not a point in time necessarily. And what we found is year over year, people's 9-box rating changed. 50% of the people changed every year. So it didn't really become a good predictor of who are our most successful, high potential people in the organization. The other piece around the succession planning was we spend a lot of time building these succession pipelines or succession charts and identifying specific individuals who could replace others in the organization. And then when we needed to fill key roles in the organization, what we realized is we only filled jobs 15% of the time with the people who had been identified as successors. So if you can imagine spending all this time debating the talent that you have and your succession plans and your 9-box charts, and at the end of the day, it's not actually yielding the results that you need, then you realize that you need to come up with a different process that's going to actually yield key talent decisions for you.
Thank you. Okay, Jay, I think we're going to go into a little bit more specific details.
Yeah, just the one other thing I would say about our purpose as well is I think this is really important. If any of you are considering changing your performance management process, if we want to call it a process, is it sets an example. This is also something we're very mindful of is what we do as an organization, and we have this organizational-wide process. We'll set an example for what we expect of our leaders at ADP. So when we thought about approaches we could take, like asking for annual reviews or quarterly reviews even, they all sound kind of funny. It's almost out of line with what you would teach in a good leadership development program, totally out of sync around what great leaders do is typically not talk to their people just once a year or once a quarter. Like if you apply that to your family and you only talk to your kids once a quarter, it's kind of insane. So we debated quite a bit around how often is enough and what do we really want to be asking of our leaders, because this will really show them really what we expect them to do with their people and also what we believe great leadership is. So that does bring us to some more specifics here, which I'm sure everyone's really more interested in. But I think all those were upfront were important design elements for us. Let me go ahead and show this slide, which is really kind of maps out all the things we were moving from and moving towards. The first thing I'd like to make a point around is we really tried to separate what different elements of this approach actually are meant to do. So some things that we have in place are meant to really accelerate performance, which is very, very important. As I said, that's one of our driving purposes here. But we still do have some needs for the organization that we have to solve for as well. So some things are more about measuring performance. So we try to really, again, pay attention from an experiential or a design perspective. Who is this for? Which element of our performance management process is meant to serve which needs? I think historically we've mixed those things a little bit too much, so we're trying to be very, very careful to keep those things pure. So on this acceleration side, maybe we'll start there and then see what questions there might be in the audience. We've really started to rethink the whole concept of goals. So historically, actually, SMART goals have actually been in the measurement side, really been about how do we make sure we understand what people's goals are, measure them against them at the end of the year, and hold them accountable. But what's interesting is you look back at all the goal research that was done decades ago, it was really more about setting really challenging goals for people because it helped them perform more. The problem with that in your organizations, I'm sure if that's an approach you take, is as soon as you start measuring someone's goals, the likelihood of them setting extremely challenging goals from themselves is probably going to decline. You'd have to be almost insane to set a goal for yourself that you're not going to achieve, or you might not achieve at the end of the year, and then have your compensation based on that at the end of the year. So goal setting historically had become a little bit more of a negotiation between your manager and yourself to make sure you're setting things that are just hard enough that they're actually realistic, but might not actually help you perform more. So for us, it's really about simplicity and speed. So we're introducing something called focus areas, which is meant to be super simple, agile, changing throughout the year, not necessarily directly measured at the end of the year, so really encouraging people to set really challenging targets for themselves. So that's one thing. Another, which is a very big element, and in full transparency, we use one of ADP's products called Standout to support this, is we have a weekly check-in process. So instead of asking our leaders to meet with their teams once a year and talk about performance, or once a quarter, we're actually asking them to do so every single week. So every week to have a short, near-term conversation about strengths and priorities, essentially. How are you doing and what are you doing every week? So that's something we've launched with this process to make sure we have our team leaders or our managers really closely aligned with our team leaders and providing very, very frequent near-term coaching on a regular basis. And then finally, we've actually also started to reposition a concept of an engagement survey. So we actually are using more of a pulsing mechanism, but also really on demand for leaders, for them to measure engagement anytime they feel is important on their team and get their results immediately, so they can act on it. Because we believe, our leaders really are the ones that impact the engagement of their team. So we want to make sure they have tools to measure that quickly and act on it right away.
So Jay, first of all, that's incredible. And I think it kind of raises two questions. One is, how quickly could you make this change and get everyone on board? And the second that's related is, was everybody on board? Did you have challenges with starting this process as you went through the transformation?
Both good questions. We haven't actually started yet, so I can't answer the timing one. Just kidding. Jill, maybe we can go to the timeline. Do you want to share maybe a little bit about the pace?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I talked a little bit about our culture in the beginning, and we are a very conservative, historically a very conservative culture, and very cautious. And we would build everything out to a T before we would implement it. Before we would roll anything out, we were really very precise about the planning. And with the world of transformation that we're in, we said, let's take advantage of this opportunity to be really agile, to develop on the fly, to not pilot, which is a typical process that we would engage with new programs and processes. We said, we're going to go big and we're going to go bold. We're going to go worldwide, so 58,000 associates around the world as quickly as we possibly can, and we're going to bring people along on the journey, and we're going to iterate as we go. So you can see with this timeline, it's pretty aggressive. And so for a company of 58,000 associates, multiple languages, for us to take a position that said, we can do this, and we're going to bring everybody along on the journey. And we're going to ensure that we spend the time working with our managers so that they're prepared for this, for our associates. We put them at the heart of this whole implementation effort. We put a team together. Jay led a pretty robust project team that worked through the details every single week. We were able to move faster than probably any other of the TNBC clients that they've had. So anything you want to add to that, Jay?
Yeah, it's, I think one of the things that was helpful for us in this timeline is we actually did run for a period of time concurrent processes. So we really launched this approach, especially the check-in approach and really the strengths aspect of this, while we had our traditional process really starting to phase out. So it was kind of interesting when you hold, kind of something you believe, and we really believed is much more positive, and it's going to be much more of an impact, and people could use that at the same time as the old process. It didn't really take too much time for us to convince people that the new option is better, right? It would be like
pain will do that to you.
yeah, exactly. So it kind of helped us to have, said another way, like if you had your iPhone and your old Motorola flip phone at the same time, it's not going to take very long before you drop the Motorola phone and you forget it ever existed. So that really helped us as well. But end to end, we in the U.S. at least, it took us about 6 months to get this fully underway, which is about 30,000 associates. So I like to think of it as agile at scale. We're moving super fast. We're moving everyone at the same time, but by no means are we done. We're going to listen really closely to what people think about this and pivot along the way. So hopefully that answers that question.
It does, and we just got a follow-up question. Can you talk a little bit about the change management activities that you implemented in order to make this happen?
Yeah, I think one, and we have a slide that shows this, but maybe while I find that, Jill, if you want to talk maybe a little bit about how we, which is kind of a classic approach, but how we involved our executives along the way.
Yeah, so the first thing we did, and I'm sure any of you who have gone through a significant change or shift in your organization have taken a similar approach. You want to make sure that your executives are on board. And so we spent a fair amount of time really working through with them what it would look like and what they could expect, and asking them also to be at the forefront and to participate and to be the role models for the rest of the organization. And so I would say that most of them right out of the gate were really willing to do that. There were some that were a little bit more concerned about where we were going, but we have brought them along through that process. So
yeah, I think another one is really where we started, is let's find a purpose that people actually care about. So, another big change strategy is find, like, what's in it for me, right? We really need to clearly define that. So for managers, you'd be hard pressed to find a manager or team leader that would argue with the fact that we want to help your experience here and we want you to spend more time with your teams, talk to your teams, and get better performance. Like, that's crazy to argue that. And then for our associates, it's, hey, we want ADP to be a place where you can really learn more about yourself, understand your strengths, and really leverage those more at work. And then the other thing I'd mention here is marketing was big for us. The video we just showed a moment ago was actually part of our change management strategy, that we really wanted to bring the experience that people were having up to the whole organization. So as we had some groups just starting, bringing that experience open and showing that, hey, it's not all perfect, by the way. Some people are struggling with this or kind of getting through it and figuring it out, but certainly by no means perfect. And then here you could see we were super visible as well. One big challenge, again, I'm sure most of you have, is capacity, just people's capacity to absorb changes and understand what's going on. So we felt it very important to make sure we were out in front and in people's faces. So we made sure that they were aware of what was going on. And again, this standout approach is really the kind of core of what we launched. We had it, you could see here on the exit gate as people came into parking lots, in the elevator, on stairs, to make sure that it was really maintaining that level of awareness about, what we were introducing to the organization. So those were, I think, three big things.
Yeah, and what's interesting as you look at this slide, this was not mandated. We did not hand out, here, put this banner here, put this on the floor, hang up this poster. We let people sort of develop that on their own. And so there was a lot of creativity from office to office as people really wanted to make sure that the message was out there. So they all became marketers in this process with their own individual tastes around it.
Yep. So all these examples were from our India office, and came from our team out there to really kind of bring it alive for that organization.
The other thing I would add is really the focus on education. We really want people to come to the table and participate in this because it means something to them. So there's actually very little that we mandate in this process. For example, the weekly check-ins, we want people to participate because it means something. They're getting something out of it, as opposed to mandating or creating an environment of compliance where everybody has to participate. The one area that we were pretty strong on in terms of mandatory participation was really our manager education. We asked each manager to invest 4 hours of their time for their own development. And this was not education or training about the tool or about the process, but it was really about how do you have meaningful conversations with your associates. And while that sounds intuitive, I think the managers really appreciated the focus on coaching and really sort of giving them license to be able to spend that time just talking and getting to know their associates and what strengths they bring to the table.
Yeah, that's a great point as well.
Perfect. And I know we need to keep moving with the presentation, but we do have one more question before we move on. What about the link between performance and compensation?
So I'm glad that was the next question, because that'll bring us back on track in terms of the slides here. So I'm going to go back to this slide, which is kind of our staple around the acceleration side and the measurement side. So this question to me is all about the measurement piece of performance management. nothing we've described so far is linked to compensation. So that is one important part, is everything on the acceleration side, as soon as that becomes, again, in our point of view, as soon as that becomes a strong link to compensation, it's going to change the dynamic of that experience for people. And as Jill said, this wasn't mandated. It's really, there to help them and get more from themselves and their teams. But there's still this measurement problem that we really needed to solve for to make sure that we maintain that pay for performance approach. So we've launched something called Performance Pulse, which is, you can kind of think about it as a short real-time survey that asks our managers to kind of react to the performance of their team members and generate data. Generate data every quarter about, again, the performance of the people on their team. So we collect that data throughout the year. And then when we get closer to the year-end process, what we do is basically take all that data and allow that to really drive the compensation process. So that's a linkage, is really this reliable performance measure, which again is called Performance Pulse, to really guide those decisions. It doesn't make the decisions for us. Like any good analytic that sports teams use, it won't make every decision for you, but it's a really good quality data point, one of the best data points I've seen that can really help guide what those decisions might be. So that's the link. The check-ins aren't linked to that. There's no annual written performance review. It's a super short, takes our team leaders about 2 minutes every quarter for each person to complete that performance pulse. So hopefully that starts to answer that question, but that's a big one.
That's probably the one area that our executives, really all of our leaders, have the most angst over.
Yeah.
Because it's such a departure from the way they are used to looking at the annual performance rating and then connecting that to a specific compensation recommendation. And now we're really asking them to think very differently about the whole picture of performance over the year, and connecting that to the right compensation decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is something that a lot of our the companies on the phone will agree with. That that's something that. Before we move on, I did just want to give a shout out to Sherry, who was on the phone. Who said she was in the first video.
Excellent.
So we can share that video. She's on the line with us.
Thanks, Sherry.
Well, good. So maybe, Amanda, if you want me to take this a little bit further, I think another important point, which is kind of related to this compensation aspect, is one of the other big pivots we're making is around this whole idea of calibration. Because we did do a lot of research on this idea, and we looked at companies that have completely done away with performance ratings. And we don't need to go into all the great research that Conference Board has done around that to really show the impact or negative impact that performance ratings have on people and all that good stuff. But we still felt it's important to get our leaders together to talk about talent, right? So we do think that's still important. The difference for us that's changing is we're not getting them together to talk about a 9-box, which Jill shared, wasn't really actually worth all the time we were putting into it. What we're asking our leaders to start doing is get together and talk about actions. Let's talk about the decisions we need to make about our people, and compensation is just one of those things. And that's where I've seen a lot of organizations that have done away with performance ratings in their entirety. They're still getting their managers to talk about where should we allocate the biggest rewards. Who should those people be? But we're not going back and we're trying not to go back and label those people then as our high potentials or high performers. It really is about, let's make sure we're getting together and making a collective decision about our people. And that's worth spending the time to really calibrate on. So that's really a kind of a subtle, but it's a very big difference in the approach we're trying to take. And then again, that performance pulse data just becomes a data point to help in that conversation.
Jay, can you share an example of some of the questions that are on the performance test?
Yeah, I can. So there's, for us, there's 6 questions. The most important 2, one of them is, in this example, we could say, I go to Jay when I need when I need extraordinary results. I always go to Jay when I need extraordinary results. So there's a lot of science and research that's gone behind that wording. It's not something we just came up with in the last 6 months. And so that's one thing. It's really about, trying to get a sense of, from a leader, is this a person that, if, what is your intent around this person if you had a chance to pick someone that get great results on your team, would you actually go to that person? So more about the intended action versus, we're not going and rating, Jay's ability to collaborate with others or strategic thinking. Maybe we should. Just kidding. But it's really about the intent of the manager. So another one is I choose to work with Jay as much as I possibly can. It's really more about the behaviors that Jay is demonstrating, and does that lead to me as a manager wanting to work with Jay more and more? Because one of the things we really believe is our managers can reliably rate the actions that they would take about their people. But in terms of being able to rate behaviors or competencies, those types of things, there's plenty of research that would say that is not going to generate good data for us. So we want to be really, really careful about the questions we ask in that performance poll. So those are the core two examples.
Thank you. And which of the results are shared with employees, or do you share the survey results?
Another great question. Jill, do you want to take that one, or would you like me to take that one?
Sure. So the questions and the answers are really for the manager to give them the perspective of, when I think about Jay, how should I think about his performance? So we don't share the actual results of those questions with the associates, but it really is intended, again, for the manager to be able to think about. So depending on how I answer those questions, this is the type of conversation I'm going to have with Jay about his performance. Because I noticed that I don't always go to Jay for extraordinary results. So there's something in that I need to talk to Jay about, because I want to be able to have that opportunity. I want to think about Jay as someone I always go to. So what's stopping that? And let me think about it, and let me have that conversation with Jay so that we are both more aligned on how we're viewing collectively that performance.
Yeah, so really transparency around the thinking behind, the data, but not the data itself. Again, and when we look at this slide, again, that's for the organization. That performance data from Performance Pulse is meant to serve the organization. We don't believe it would help our people by showing them that number, but certainly the conversation with their team leader should be fully transparent and open around, why did they respond a certain way, not how they responded to those questions.
Great, thank you. And I know we have a few more questions coming in. Keep submitting your questions, and we'll keep answering them. But I know we have a few more slides we want to get through.
Sure.
So
So bear with me as I figure out how to make this work. Okay, here we go. So we shared the timeline. We can share one more video as well. I just checked with maybe our producers here and make sure that this is going to work. I'm not sure if we got any other feedback about the audio in the last video. But this would be a great time to play that if it will work for the audience here.
If you look at the actual tool itself, the standout tool itself, there is a discipline to it that says, I'm sorry, you don't develop talent if you aren't talking to one another. And the two people you aren't talking to one another the most is the team leader and the team member, because that's where the work is. As it happens, that's where the humans are too. So the idea of coming into this space, this talent activation space, and saying, listen, you want to get the best out of your people, there's a discipline. Talk to your people every week about near-term work and give them coaching advice, and there's a way to systematize that. I think that does appeal to some of the discipline elements of ADP, going, oh, this isn't just a good idea. This is like, there's a discipline. You want to stick to the discipline? Oh, you don't want to stick to the discipline. Okay, now we have a conversation.
When I get the emails, hey, time to check in, that's when I think about it, and then I'm like, all right, I'm busy. I didn't get back to the phone calls. I don't have time anymore.
I love this week. I love this week, and sometimes it's just like.
My answers were always the same every single week. So I kind of stopped doing them. But as I thought about it more, it started coming to my mind more.
I think that loathing question in there It's still very intimidating to a lot of people.
Okay, well, I don't want to say that I love checking my emails because I have to.
You don't want to come across as sounding like complaining with what you loathe, you know?
Because in my mind, what I'm going to get back is, well, it's your job. Get used to it.
And at first, it was kind of hard for me to really put down things that I really loathe because I don't want people knowing my weaknesses. You know, like, hey, like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that.
When they see the word loathe, they're kind of like, well, I don't want to tell her that I hate something about my job. I need my job.
But once you're honest with yourself, you actually put that down for other people to see.
And it gives them a way to not necessarily vent, I'll say for lack of a better term right now, to vent out anything that happened the prior week. Okay, yes, I can vent about it, but when there's something that's going right, it also gives me an opportunity to let Sherry know, hey, you know, this is what I'm doing. This is what worked. Maybe this is what didn't work.
It does allow me to just ask specific questions and get to some detail that I wouldn't normally get.
So the fact that we have standout and I have to report on a weekly basis and I have to say something on a weekly basis, it forces me to maintain that communication.
Check in, those focus questions, those 5 questions, get us right to that point of impact quicker and faster.
Okay, excellent. Hopefully that worked for everyone. I didn't do a great job setting that video up. What that was meant to do for us was really, again, showing you some of the experience our associates were going through with this whole weekly check-in approach. So you heard about some of the questions that are asked in that. Happens through a technology, it's enabled through a technology, which is really just meant to bring some discipline and some rigor to how those conversations happen week to week. But you can see it's a little bit of a struggle in some areas. It takes some time, but what we found is the more our associates really got familiar with it, it led to a lot more trust in terms of openness between team members and their team leader as they really kind of shared more in those conversations. So those are really meant to be helping our people reflect on their week, learn from their week about what they really enjoyed doing or what they didn't enjoy doing, which is all about understanding your strengths and then talking to their team leader around how do I apply those more next week. Now, based on what I learned this week, how do I apply more next week? So meant to be super short, really light touch conversations week over week. So one of the important things that I don't know if anyone's asked yet, Amanda, is this actually having an impact for us? So we've been moving really fast, and luckily now we can start to measure whether or not it is having an impact. So we have one example here. One of the things we can look at is how much are people really adopting the approach, and then is that impacting subsequently people's engagement? So through how we're measuring engagement and then people's adoption, we have an example here. This is actually a little bit of an old example now, as it's from September, and we have some more recent results that are even more powerful than this. But what you can see is what this shows is for people that aren't really adopting the check-in approach and having frequent conversations with their team leader, they're the purple bar. Much lower engagement on every one of our engagement pulse items than the people that are having frequent conversations with their team leaders. So you can see on every single item, being enthusiastic about ADP's mission, whether or not you feel like your team members have your back, confidence in the future, whether or not you're using your strengths, whether or not you're growing in ADP, whether or not you're feeling recognized. Every single question that we have that really matters in terms of people's engagement, we can see whether or not people are adopting has a significant impact. So there we can start to see that with adopting the approach we're using, we can get better engagement from our teams. And now what we don't have in this deck, but we're starting to see in our more recent research, is that leads to better performance. So by tying some of this to the performance pulse data we also have, we can see really strong correlations between adoption, engagement, and subsequent performance. So in terms of impact, it's all kind of early signals for us, just given how fast we're moving. But we're seeing more and more data build that is demonstrating, we're feeling like we're on a pretty positive path here.
Do you have any data around how long this is taking, especially a manager with a large team? How much time is this taking out of their day when they're doing this every week?
Yeah, Jill, do you want to take that? You have a large team.
Yes, I do. So, It's a great question, and it's actually one of the greatest objections people had coming out of the gate before they even experienced it, right, Jay?
Yeah.
So, I have a large team. How am I going to be able to read the check-ins, respond to the check-ins, and meet with my team every week? That seems like a lot and too much for me to handle. And what's really been interesting as we watched this, we said, okay, ideally, and the data will show us that if you do this weekly, you're going to have the highest engagement and ultimately, as Jay talked about, the highest performance. But some team leaders said, you know what, I want to split up the time. I want to do half my team one week and half my team the other week. That works as well. It literally takes 2 minutes as a manager to read somebody's check-in and to respond to it. And what's beautiful about that experience is when I meet with Jay every week, I know what are his priorities, what are the things he loved working on, what are the things that he loathed working on over the past week, and how can I help him? So it creates that sort of structure so that when I have a conversation with him every week, so that part probably didn't change for us. We used to meet every week, but it was more like, so how's it going? As opposed to, I understand exactly what you're working on, what your priorities are, what are the things that are getting in your way, and what are those things that I can help you with. It makes the conversation so much more efficient and effective for managers, and we're able to really see through the check-in process and through the analytics that it's having a significant impact. And so it's interesting that that's probably the biggest objection that people have going into it, and now we don't really hear about that at all anymore.
Absolutely. And what about, how is it impacting the manager's performance, or are they rewarded for doing this? How are you getting them to participate? Are there other benefits?
Yeah.
Or is it just the engagement?
Well, I think that's a pretty big one. As a manager, there's definitely a kind of a reciprocal impact. If your team is engaged, you're going to also naturally feel more engaged. It's much more of a struggle for any manager out there that's had a team that's, either not performing or not engaged. That's a challenging place to be. We don't have any data yet to say it's impacting, the actual performance of managers. Something we can measure as we continue to go on. So at the moment, it's really, what we're getting back is the experience that we're hearing from our managers, and one of our managers on the webinar with us today, that it's helping, right? That it's really helping them be more efficient, have better conversations, and kind of really getting to faster insights with their team members, because it is carrying that conversation every week. So it doesn't feel like we need to recap everything every week or once a month. So it's helping kind of move things at a faster pace and keep them better connected to their team members. So we don't have data to show yet that, personally, we don't have data at ADP to show that is subsequently leading to different things. But the evidence we have so far from people's experience, which again was one of our major purposes, is very, very positive. So Jill, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, as a leader, you want the highest engagement that you could possibly have on your team. And you want all of your members of your team to be engaged, not just a few, right? So one of the things, because we know that the managers who are participating and who are engaging in the process have the highest engagement, that's incentive for the leader. So rather than setting goals for leaders around, you should have X engagement, we're giving them the tools and the insights so that they can see for themselves that they have the power to really make a difference and to drive the engagement of their teams, and that in and of itself becomes a great incentive for them.
Yep.
Thank you. And we are getting some conversation on the chat, and that's great. Any comments on, so this is the manager working with their employee. Are there opportunities for peers or other employees to provide feedback? So
on the feedback side for us, not at the moment. It's something we actually used to have at ADP that we just paused for a moment, is around an ability for you to share some insight with your network and improve kind of team effectiveness. Just given everything we had going on, we paused it for a moment, but there's huge team benefit for Standout. That's actually one of the change management strategies we had is everyone goes through the assessment you heard about in the video and gets an understanding of their strengths. That becomes a team building activity to get together and talk about, hey, what did you learn from your assessment? Well, I'm this role, or I'm a provider pioneer. What does that mean? So there's an opportunity live in conversation, let's call it team coaching, for people to share what they're learning about themselves, get some insight from their peers about how they see you at work, and that actually helps from a development perspective. But from a feedback perspective, that's not something built into our approach right now from a peer perspective.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, though, is with traditional systems, sometimes you only get feedback from your direct manager. And I'm sure ADP, like many of your organizations, lives in a very highly matrixed environment. And so you have your direct manager, and then you might have project managers and different teams and efforts that you're working on. So we have the ability with Standout to get feedback from not just the direct manager, but a project manager, a matrix manager. So it's a really intuitive tool from that perspective.
Yeah, it is team-based, the approach. So every time we say teams and team leaders, it doesn't necessarily mean a hierarchical team leader. So in our approach right now, I have the project team. Our team leading this project is one that I have set up where I can see their check-ins. I can see really quickly if they need something from me. And I could do a performance pulse on those people. So there's that ability, which is really organizing the approach, the performance approach around kind of this dynamic teaming environment that I think a lot of companies are moving towards, certainly ours. So it supports that very well.
I know we're coming to the end. We only have a couple minutes. So Jill or Jay, any last comments?
I would just say if any of you are thinking about making a change like this in your organization, Jay and I are happy to talk to you about the experience and really what it's like to sell this concept internally in the organization at an executive level, how you build your implementation team to make this happen. But given everything that we've gone through, this experience, I would highly recommend making the effort to do this.
Yeah, I would agree. And if any of you are kind of on the edge of whether you should change a traditional process, this is my favorite slide around. This isn't healthcare that we're playing with. This isn't this isn't people's paychecks that they rely on every week. This is performance management. So while certainly there's some urgency around this process, if it's tied to compensation, you're not going to break anything. And what we could see in all the research is traditional practices might be doing more damage than they're actually helping with. So take the plunge would be my biggest recommendation, and move fast through it because the impact can be super, super significant for your organization.
Thank you. So we are about out of time for today. Jill, Jay, thank you so much for joining us and sharing, and thank you to everyone that's participating on the line. We had many wonderful questions and comments. So just a brief reminder, if you are still on the line, please fill out the evaluation. That'll be up on your screen in just a minute. Your feedback is important to us, so we do. You'll also see on the slide right now is a leadership development conference that's coming up next month. So if you are interested in attending that conference, use the code that's on your screen for a discount, and you can register at conferenceboard.org. So thank you all for joining, and this is Amanda Popila. It's been a pleasure hosting this webcast today, and we'll see you next time.